I think this microphone's working. Yeah, sick nuts. Hello, everybody. Welcome to 2-Bit Movie Club. It is an extraordinarily special edition because I am here by myself in the basement. Everything's gone back to normal upstairs. Everyone has actual work to do, so I am the man that they put down here to talk about space. Thank you very much for joining me. Otherwise, this would be extraordinarily weird. I can't actually see how many people are watching, so if it's no one, holy fuck, that would suck. We're doing a space-themed night tonight. This is not really trash movies or anything that's close to our brief. It's largely just that I have been watching shitloads of old archival space footage lately because one thing government departments are really, really good at doing is actually keeping records. So unlike all the movies that were made from the 50s to 70s where heaps of stuff just dropped off the radar and will never be seen again, every single bit of like 8mm and 16mm film used to track space operations and military stuff was kept in a hermetically sealed vault somewhere and has all been restored and is all free to use and all looks fucking fantastic. I said in The Thing that I was going to be doing it from the 50s through to the 70s. That turned out to be a lie. I don't have a single clip for the 50s, largely because all the cool stuff happened in the 60s. Most of the space stuff that happened in the 50s, please ignore this if you don't know a lot about space, or do know a lot about space, you can prove me wrong. Seem to be like high-speed jet tests and like getting into not low Earth orbit, but getting up into the upper atmosphere in X-planes and stuff, which is nowhere near as cool as actually going into goddamn space. The other thing that's missing from this is the Nazi scientist Wernher von Braun. I don't know if any of you have been coming to 2-Bits for a long time, but that man pops his head up in the most unexpected places. He was in our Retro Futurama one. He's been in some of our UFO stuff. The Americans absolutely love to trot out former Nazi scientist Wernher von Braun, and I managed to avoid including him in this one, which I believe is a powerful act of resistance. I'm going to kick this off, I think. The first chunk of clips is almost entirely all the 60s, but also I left my notes on my computer, not on this computer, so I could be wrong. So you and I are going on a journey together. We're going to find this out at the same time. Usually I've got someone else pressing play on this and I'm not holding a microphone, so let's see how smooth this transition is. What should I press play on first? Let's go this one.
The time is 9:34 a.m., May 5th, 1961, Cape Canaveral, Florida. High above, atop this Redstone rocket,
10, 9,
Alan Shepard waits.
7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. Lift off. All right, lift off, and the clock has started.
Yes, the clock had started, not only on this nation's first manned flight into space, but it had started on a new age in manned space exploration. Within 3 weeks, President Kennedy had charted our course. The landing of men on the moon before the end of the decade.
The Apollo spacecraft will consist of 3 modules. The command module will carry the 3-man crew together with guidance, communications, and life support systems. The service module will contain propulsion systems for mid-course maneuvers, as well as for entering and escaping the lunar orbit. The lunar excursion module will carry 2 crew members to the surface of the moon, along with scientific instruments, communications, and guidance systems. It also will have a propulsion capability for lunar landing and for return to the orbiting command and service modules. The Apollo spacecraft and its launch escape system total 75 feet in length. The 3-stage advanced Saturn booster adds another 280 feet in length. In Project Apollo, Saturn's first stage will provide 7.5 million pounds of thrust from 5 F-1 engines for liftoff and initial powered flight. The second stage will develop 1 million pounds of thrust from 5 J-2 engines to boost the spacecraft almost into Earth orbit. Immediately after ignition of the second stage, the launch escape system will be jettisoned. A single J-2 engine in the S-4B stage will provide 200,000 pounds of thrust. It will place the spacecraft in an Earth parking orbit. Then its engine will be shut down. At the proper predetermined time and position in the Earth orbit, the S-4B will be reignited for propelling the spacecraft into a translunar trajectory. A few minutes later, staging will occur. The S-4B will be separated, fairings will be jettisoned, and the Lunar Excursion Module will be repositioned to a nose-to-nose attitude with a command module. A number of mid-course maneuvers may be required to place the spacecraft into position for obtaining the desired orbit around the Moon. Preparatory to acquiring its lunar orbit, the spacecraft will be reoriented for deceleration. The service module propulsion system will slow the spacecraft to the proper velocity for obtaining a precise circular orbit approximately 100 nautical miles above the lunar surface. While the spacecraft is coasting in its lunar orbit, 2 members of the crew will transfer to the Lunar Excursion Module through the hatch at the connection point between the 2 vehicles. After preparations are completed, the Lunar Excursion Module will separate from the command and service modules, which will remain in lunar orbit. The Lunar Excursion Module will be properly oriented, and its propulsion system will transfer the vehicle into an elliptical orbit suitable for approaching the lunar surface. The vehicle will be reoriented for landing. Then, through a carefully blended combination of manual control and automatic systems operation, the vehicle will be lowered toward the lunar surface. It will be able to hover and, if necessary, move laterally so that the crew can select the touchdown point. Before taking any other action, the 2 lunar explorers will prepare for relaunching. In addition to their own inspection and checking, they will be instructed and guided in this activity by the 3rd member in the mothership and by information transmitted from Earth. Photographs and samples of the lunar surface will be obtained. Apparatus for continued operation and transmission of scientific data back to Earth probably will be left on the Moon. The crew will fire the lunar launching engine at a precisely determined instant to enter a transfer ellipse calculated to rendezvous with the mothership after traveling part of the way around the Moon. After proper orientation, the Lunar Excursion Module will complete the docking maneuver. The 2 lunar explorers will transfer back into the command module. Their Lunar Excursion Module probably will be left in lunar orbit to save weight on the return trip. After the command and service modules are thoroughly checked out and all calculations are confirmed, the Apollo spacecraft will be fired into its trajectory for return to Earth. Following mid-course corrections and just before entering the Earth's atmosphere, the service module will be jettisoned and the command module will be oriented for re-entry. At an altitude of approximately 50,000 feet, a drogue parachute will deploy to stabilize the vehicle. This will be followed shortly by the main parachute system, which will gently lower the command module to Earth, probably on land rather than at sea.
Senator Fulbright has questioned the necessity for this moon race, Deke, and he says that this $40-some-odd billion being used in this program to try to get a man on the moon before the Russians, possibly by 1970, might better be used here to improve our economic conditions in this country. Would you comment on this?
Well, my obvious answer is I don't agree with him. And I think if you took the line of approach here that you did not spend any of this money on the moon. That doesn't mean that it's going to be spent on whatever anybody else has in mind. I think every program has to stand on its own merits, and you don't pull it out of one thing and automatically dump it to something else just because it then becomes available.
What is the military necessity for this?
The military necessity for the moon? I missed that part of your question.
I tried for the moon race.
Frankly, I'm not sure what the military necessity is. I don't know that we fully realize at this point in time just what we are going to get out of the moon or not get out of it. I think you can envision some military uses for the moon, but that is not the purpose of our program at this time as far as I'm aware of.
You said this live field contract automatically covers this group.
Yes, sir.
Is that with or without their permission? Isn't it possible that they might not want to peddle their
certainly.
personal story?
Okay, this is correct. This
Do you
is
want to
strictly.
ask them about it?
I don't think we want to ask them about it here, no. I think this is their option, and they'll have to make a decision somewhere along the line. I wouldn't want to ask them to do it today.
Would you ask each of them to state their religious preference?
Yes, sir. You want to start at the left end of the line?
No religious preference.
Roman Catholic.
Presbyterian.
Moravian.
No religious preference. My parents are Lutheran.
Episcopalian.
Presbyterian. Roman Catholic.
Methodist.
Protestant. No religious preference otherwise.
Roman Catholic.
Protestant in general. I was brought up in a congregational church.
Now the most crucial moment for the Mariner team.
That's all right. We should start. Yeah, we should start right about
It is time for the spacecraft to detect light from Mars. Start the tape recorder, an actual taking of pictures.
I'll tell you what, I'm going to be mighty glad to hear that they got a narrow angle signal. I'll be ecstatic. Yeah.
Picture taking should have begun 12 minutes ago, but if Schneiderman learns that it did not, nothing on Earth he could do could make up for the failure.
We are now approaching lunar sunrise, and for all the people back on Earth, the crew of Apollo 8 has a message that we would like to send to you. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth, and the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep. And the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. And God said, "Let there be light." And there was light. And God saw the light, that it was good, and divided the light from the darkness. And God called the light day, and the darkness he called night, and the evening and the morning were the first day. And God said, "Let there be a firmament in the midst of the waters, and let it divide the waters from the waters." And God made the firmament, and divided the waters which were under the firmament from the waters which were above the firmament. And it was so. And God called the firmament heaven, and the evening and the morning were the second day. And God said, "Let the waters under the heaven be gathered together into one place, and let the dry land appear." And it was so. And God called the dry land earth, and the gathering together of the waters called he seas. And God saw that it was good. And from the crew of Apollo 8, we close with good night, good luck, a Merry Christmas, and God bless all of you on the good earth. UNA 1618 plus 1221.
The next act in the prologue to lunar landing was Apollo 10. crew of the astronauts entered the lunar module and took it down to within 50,000 feet of the lunar surface. The final and most critical tests were completed successfully. The Sea of Tranquility now awaits the arrival of the first men from Earth.
Monitor descent. Descent. Helium monitor select switch to supercritical position. Supercritical.
3 men will make the journey. Astronauts Neil Armstrong, Edwin Aldrin, and Michael Collins. They will share some of the experiences of those who preceded them. The launching, Earth orbit, rendezvous and docking, lunar orbit, separation of the command and lunar modules. Astronaut Collins will remain aboard the command module in lunar orbit. Astronauts Armstrong and Aldrin will land on the moon. Here on Earth, they have rehearsed the activities they will perform. The men are ready. The machines are ready. Now we know the dream will be achieved. The challenge will be met. In 10 short years, we have come a long way. But man's journey into space has just begun.
I believe that this nation should commit itself to achieving the goal before this decade is out of landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to the Earth. No single space project in this period will be more impressive to mankind or more important for the long-range exploration of space, and none will be so difficult or expensive to accomplish. But in a very real sense, it will not be one man going to the moon. If we make this judgment affirmatively, it will be an entire nation.
Christmas, 1968, when man first cut the silver cord of Earth's gravity to orbit the moon. Saturn V had provided the power to take him there. The command and service modules had sustained him. But man cannot begin his mastery of the moon until he can land on its inhospitable surface and take off again. To do this, he needs the third basic piece of hardware, the lunar module. The lunar module is a new concept designed exclusively for use in the vacuum of space. A 2-man taxi used as a shuttle between the lunar surface and the orbiting command module. But before men can use the lunar module as an operational lunar spacecraft, it must be tested in space, first in Earth orbit. This was the primary purpose of Apollo 9, the third manned Apollo mission. Jim McDivitt, Dave Scott, Rusty Schweikert, 3 men to qualify this new machine, to make ready for the moon. This was the most complex system ever sent into space. First, the Saturn V, 7.5 million pounds of thrust from its first stage alone, over 3 million working parts. Then the lunar module, well over 1 million parts. And the command and service modules, over 2 million parts.
35 seconds in counting.
March 3rd, 1969, the countdown for the launch of Apollo 9 was underway. Each piece checked out before launch.
Computer monitors, 20 seconds. Guidance release, 15, 14, 13, 12, 11, 10, 9. We have ignition sequence start. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. All engines running. Commit. Liftoff. We have liftoff at 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Go all the way. Everything looks good. Roger. And Apollo 9 at 5 minutes. Everybody's happy as a clam here. Looking good. So are we. Very good. Oh boy, what a view. It really is.
Alone in the command module, hatch opened, Dave Scott also had work to do.
Okay, Dave, come on out. Okay. Come on, let the camera run here. Taking pictures of everybody taking pictures. Yeah, you want to retrieve a sample? Right, that's a good idea.
Now, both Scott and Schweikert were retrieving experimental thermal samples attached to the exteriors of the lunar and command modules. Because of Schweikert's upset stomach the previous day, his extravehicular transfer from the lunar module to the command module, to be used if the transfer tunnel were blocked, was curtailed.
If I don't see it, so there it is, there. Now you're coming in. Keep it coming. You're almost there. You're about there. I have captured. Really good. Okay. Why don't you take a break for a while? Man, when I take a break, I'm going to bed for 3 days.
It had been a full 5 days, but the lunar module had checked out beyond expectations. In all aspects, it seemed ready for the moon. Now it was time to jettison the ascent stage of the lunar module to free the command module for the remainder of the mission. When a safe clearance had been established, the final test, the ascent engine of the lunar module was ignited to burn until its propellant ran out. The crew of Apollo 9 watched as their lunar module, now crewless, arced away from them.
Hey, it's really moving out. I hope I didn't forget anything on board it. He's sure a long ways away.
For the last 5 days, the flight of Apollo 9 settled into a routine of picture-taking and observations, with an occasional burn to refine the orbit. But this routine was a look into the future, a future when manned orbiting space stations, operating in concert with unmanned scientific satellites, could examine the Earth from this vantage point. When cameras such as those on Apollo 9 will take multiple spectrum photographs from visible light through the infrared, locating hitherto untapped geological and biological resources. And perhaps even more important, when man can look at his world with a new perspective, quantitatively and qualitatively observe the results of his actions on the face of his world. For with the power man controls, he can change the nature of his planet. He can no longer think of unrelated occurrences. He must realize that he exists within the structure of Earth's planetary ecological system. He can observe with this new technology the results of his interaction with his environment. Water pollution on the coast of the United States. Air pollution of a major city. The results of damming a river, of irrigating a desert. But Apollo 9 was not an orbiting laboratory. It was the third manned mission of Apollo, and it was time to come down. The prime recovery area had been shifted several hundred miles because of weather conditions in the original recovery zone. With the appropriate changes made to its flight path, Apollo 9 made its final descent into the atmosphere. The crew took these pictures of the re-entry and opening of the parachutes. The 10-day mission of Apollo 9 had met all its major goals. The ability to work and make a contingency transfer in the spacesuit and the PLSS had been proven. The capability of the lunar module to fulfill its vital role in the exploration of the moon had been established. The flight of Apollo 9 showed that we are indeed ready for the next step in meeting what may be the most significant challenge of our time, the conquest of the moon.
All right. Oh, I just deafened myself with what I was listening to there. Cool. Welcome back. Hope you enjoyed that. Gotta say, the highlight for me was definitely somehow getting like what seemed like 100 guys sitting at a table to all list their religion for the sake of the reporters, which was deeply strange. Very, very, very different time. You might notice this is all sort of American-centric kind of stuff. Largely because it's much, much harder to find Soviet space footage, partially because not all of it was kept, as well as the NASA stuff was, but also because I do not speak or read Russian, which is often how those videos are titled. I've got a little bit coming up in the next group, I think. As, I mean, most of you probably know, Russia got pretty much all of the space firsts. Getting a man on the moon was imperative for the States because they hadn't really got any of the others. The Russians were the first in space, first group of 2 people at the same time in space, I think, as well. I was listening to I've been listening to the NASA Johnson Space Center, JSC, podcast, and they talk about this a little bit, about how America essentially had a choice where they were like, God damn it, we've got to beat the Russians at something. We can either go to the moon or we can be the first to have people living in space on a space station. And they were convinced that at that point, the Russians had much better space capabilities, that if they started working on a space station, Russia could almost certainly get one up first because they had better payload lifting capacity, I think. And as a result, Russia got a whole bunch of space stations up there first, the Salyut space stations, except half of them were secretly disguised military space stations. So, like, there's a whole thing now that if you sort of look into what weapons have been taken into space, just an interesting thing to read about, it's like they take utility knives up there. There are suggestions, but not confirmed, that NASA astronauts used to take guns up with them just in case they landed in hostile territory or in the wilderness or whatever. So not necessarily just like shooting, whatever. But those Russian military space stations, the Almaz space stations, one of them had a like 30-something millimeter autocannon on it that they successfully used to blow up a test satellite that was like 5 kilometers away from the space station, which is fucking terrifying. Up until I read that, I had been under the impression that we had never really done anything like that, but that's cool. Maybe a taste of what the future of space warfare is. Yeah, absolutely fucking wild. Here's a disconnected list of some other space facts that I learned recently. They have weekends on the International Space Station, which I believe is largely as a result of ostensibly because, they look very... Well, not ostensibly. This is true. They are very, very serious about how they treat the psychological welfare of the people in space, obviously because they're isolated and they could fuck out and, you don't want that. You don't want your people in your space station going crazy. But they are also very concerned about it because the 3rd crew on Skylab went on strike for like a month because they were all fucking sick of NASA's shit, which is awesome. A little bit of industrial action in space. Even now, with their like relegated weekends, the way they talk about their time management, like the way astronauts, former astronauts talk about it, is harrowing. It's not even like so they specifically have a schedule that is indicated by, they've got like a screen up in the space station that has all of their scheduled time with just a red line very slowly progressing with where they are in the day. It feels like playing a fucking game of Tetris with your time in space, which is fucking psychotic. But yeah, they're all meant to be able to withstand that sort of pressure. They're essentially trying to find the friendliest, most patient people they possibly can, who are also extremely qualified space people, which must be a trip. They take something like 10,000 applications. No, 10,000 or 18,000. Some number between those 2 points of applications to select like a handful of people for an astronaut training group, which is absolutely wild. One of the episodes of that podcast I was listening to, they were talking to the woman who essentially is in charge of that selection process. And they're still sort of trying to, because the applications were open at the time she was talking about it, they're still like encouraging people to apply, which it's just, I am not obviously the intended recipient of that encouragement. And I would say 99.999% of the people listening to that podcast would not be the intended recipient of that encouragement, because we are just useless shitheads who would not be able to do anything. Whereas, yeah, I guess there's a tiny fraction of people that actually very, very seriously want to be astronauts that also listen to podcasts about space, which is also a funny thought. Those are my thoughts about being an astronaut. I'm going to kick us into the next bracket. There's some very, very, very good stuff in here, including, I believe, this is someone's reconstruction of the original NBC broadcast of the moon landing. Obviously not all, 3 hours of it or whatever. This is just a little snippet of it, but it's very, very cool to see it all unfold in real time. Let's see how smoothly I pull off this transition.
In May 1961, Alan Shepard became the first American astronaut in space, an effort requiring special talents and skills. He was boosted into space atop a 59-foot rocket. He traveled in a small, cramped spacecraft. The trip was short and quick. Today, it's the Saturn V, 281 feet tall, and 3 men fly in the Apollo spacecraft. Their goal is a round trip to the moon. As the missions and spacecraft have changed over the years, so have the requirements for astronauts. The original 7 were heading into an unknown environment. They were engineers and test pilots. Gradually, the standards changed. The test pilot requirement was dropped. Today, nearly a third of the astronauts have their doctor's degrees. The training reflects the era. Unsure of how the human body would respond to spaceflight, the Mercury astronauts were trained for every possibility. As more flights provided knowledge, the astronauts found they did not need such simulators as this disorientation-producing Mastiff. The astronaut training program now follows this schedule. On arrival, all astronauts, pilots, and scientists receive intensive academic training to assure that they have achieved a common level of spaceflight knowledge. Classroom courses include such diverse subjects as celestial mechanics, rocket propulsion, space physics, space medicine, and geology. Classroom work is supplemented with field trips. The astronauts collecting samples on the surface of the moon will have the equivalent study of a master's degree in geology. Just as the pilot-engineer astronauts are trained as scientists, so the scientist astronauts, upon completion of their academics, are trained as pilots. All astronauts are proficient helicopter pilots, since the landing on the moon will be in a vertical landing and takeoff vehicle using rockets instead of rotor blades. The general training of the astronaut also includes instruction on survival in the desert and in the jungle, since a spacecraft could land in these terrains in case of emergency. Water survival techniques are taught since the spacecraft normally lands at sea. In the giant centrifuge or flight accelerator, they experience the high gravity sensations they will feel during their ride on a big booster and during re-entry. To become familiar with the sensations of zero gravity or weightlessness, the astronauts ride in aircraft flying precise trajectories. Scuba training is given since another method of simulating weightlessness is by working underwater. In specially constructed tanks, the astronauts enter the water weighted to provide neutral buoyancy. Once underwater, they practice work they may one day perform in the true zero gravity of space. This then is the general astronaut training program. But what happens to an astronaut once he is...
While he's out on the porch, as it's called, he will... 25 minutes of PLSS time expended now. Just sort of
okay, everything's nice and straight in here.
move his head around, see how well he can
you
see.
pull the door open a little more? Right. Okay. Did you get the main sound? I'm going to pull it now.
About to pull the ring for the camera.
Houston, the Mesa came down, all right. Houston, roger, we copy, and we're standing by for your TEV. Houston, this is Neil, radio check. Neil, this is Houston, loud and clear. Break, break, Buzz, this is Houston, radio check and verify TV circuit breaker in. Roger, TV circuit breaker's in.
That's Aldrin turning on the camera.
That's clear. Roger.
There's the picture.
And we're getting a picture on the TV. You got a good picture, huh? There's a great deal of contrast in it, and currently it's upside down on our monitor, but we can make out a fair amount of detail. Okay, would you verify the position, the opening I ought to have on the camera? Stand by.
That's right side up. Now they've turned it right. Now we can see him moving down. Let's just enjoy this.
Okay, Neil, we can see you coming down the ladder now. Neil, we can see you coming. Okay, I just checked getting back up to that first step. That isn't collapsed too far, but it's adequate to get back up. Roger, we copy. It's a pretty good little jump.
He's on the move.
Buzz, this is Houston. F2, 1/160th second for shadow photography on the sequence camera. Okay. I'm at the foot of the ladder. The LEM footbeds are only depressed in the surface about 1 or 2 inches. Although the surface appears to be very, very fine-grained as you get close to it. It's almost like a powder ground mass. It's very fine. I'm going to step off the limb now. That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
I think he said one small step for man, but one giant leap for man. I'm not certain I got all that right.
Владимир Шаталов находился и работал в космосе уже около суток. Вот он переходит из кабины корабля через гермолюк в орбитальный отсек для проведения научных исследований. А в это время на стартовую площадку космодрома прибыли новые космонавты. Их было трое. Командир космического корабля «Союз-5» подполковник Борис Валентинович Волынов, борт-инженер Алексей Станиславович Елисеев, инженер-исследователь подполковник Евгений Васильевич Хрунов. Впереди у них большой и трудный полет. Они будут первыми космонавтами первой в мире обитаемой экспериментальной космической станции. Двое, Елисеев и Хрунов, выйдут в открытый космос. На глубине 200 километров они увидят Землю, укрытую зеленью и снегом, а вокруг и рядом будет черное небо космоса, тишина и ослепительный блеск солнца. Потом наступит новый космический день, а вместе с ним обычный распорядок жизни. Утренняя физзарядка, завтрак по-космически, консервированное мясо, молочные продукты, печенье, соки в тубах.
Not quite yet. I haven't put the solar wind in yet, but I will shortly. I want to watch this. Joe, I have a good picture there. I've got...
Beautiful picture, Dave.
Well, in my left hand, I have a feather. In my right hand, a hammer. And I guess one of the reasons we got here today was because of a gentleman named Galileo a long time ago who made a rather significant discovery about falling objects in gravity fields. And we thought that where would be a better place to confirm his findings than on the moon. And so we thought we'd try it here for you. The feather happens to be appropriately a falcon feather for our falcon. And I'll drop the two of them here, and hopefully they'll hit the ground at the same time. How about that? It proves that Mr. Galileo was correct in his findings.
Superb.
10, 9, 8,
sequence start. All engines running. We have a liftoff.
May 14th, 1973. A working laboratory. Man's first home in space, on its way to Earth orbit. There to be occupied by 3 teams of astronauts in 3 record-breaking missions. Over the next several months, a lot of theory would become fact and give rise to new theory about man, about Earth, about the physical universe. But on this day, a sequence of events began to cast doubt on even a first mission.
Of course, as soon as we could listen in on the flight director net, we realized something had happened to the lab, even though it looked like a perfect launch from where we had been observing it. The meteoroid shield ripped off about 60 seconds into the flight, and with the meteoroid shield gone, this gave us the problem of overheating in the workshop, so many different ideas in the intervening 10 days were put out as different means of being able to rig a temporary heat shield or a permanent heat shield which would allow us to salvage the vehicle.
Of course, all the NASA centers were working on it, all our contractors were working on it, and taking an active part in the discussions and the decisions that were made as to what's wrong with the workshop and how we're going to fix it. We went to Marshall to work in the water tank with the proposed fixes, talked to the engineers who were working on it, talked to the flight planners, and discussed it, of course, with management. And we actually launched on the 25th of May with 3 potential ways of covering the workshop to shade it from the sun.
About 7.5 hours after liftoff, as we were rendezvousing with the workshop, the extent of the damage became apparent to us very rapidly. We first confirmed that the one solar wing had completely left the vehicle and was no longer around. We could see the damaged wires at the hinge line. And, of course, all the gold foil, which normally would have been underneath the heat shield and meteoroid shield, was exposed to the sunlight, and it had darkened on the sun side considerably. Then as we got around to the side where the jammed solar wing was, it became immediately obvious to us that this little tiny metal strap that had torn off the heat shield and meteoroid shield had jammed the solar wing.
Well, the advantages which manned spaceflight offers are in the area of repair and maintenance, which we've demonstrated time and time again on Skylab. As a matter of fact, the whole Skylab series of flights would have been a failure had it not been for the ability of the first crew to repair the space station.
Pete and I went down into the workshop, installed the canister that contained the parasol in the scientific airlock. Joe was observing the deployment of the parasol from the command module.
I couldn't see the airlock itself, but I could see this funny-looking orange thing, all rolled up and skinny, come pooching out of there. And then Pete said, okay, we're going to let her go. And it just started to unfold and did a lot of flapping, and it kind of settled halfway folded and halfway unfolded.
We deployed it as best we could, pulled it back down to us about a foot off, and that was it. It worked quite well for the rest of the mission. I think on about day 4 or 5, we definitely knew that it was no longer an uncomfortable environment. It was warm, but certainly nothing that you couldn't put up with.
Throughout the 3 manned missions, flight crews evaluated the day-to-day activities of living to see what might be improved in future spacecraft design.
Mobility was, I like to refer to it as the Peter Pan mode. You could really just push off and move around within the workshop. The thing that surprised me most was how quickly we all adapted to being fairly precise.
It's very much like the sensation you get when you're skin diving or just floating around in the water.
Well, as far as working in zero gravity and moving yourself, it was a delight in comparison to 1G on the surface of the Earth.
Once your eyes see something, then you relate to it, and you say, whatever is above my head is up, whatever is below my feet is down. Doesn't matter whether it's the floor or the ceiling.
Every evening, after dinner and all the work was done, we always had to take a trip or two around the watering lockers or just go up there and free fly.
We also found that we could have quite a bit of fun doing tricks and stunts and flips and rolls that weren't possible here on Earth. Food aboard Skylab was a very good treat when compared to earlier space missions. Probably the best feature was the fact that we had the ability through a warming tray to put all of our food out and heat it so that when you sat down to eat, you could eat a variety of foods all at once. Probably the favorite of everybody's up there was ice cream and strawberries.
Of course, it was necessary to clean house up there once in a while, too. All of our air was filtered through a big screen within the orbital workshop. And as the air went through this screen, little particles would collect on the screen, small items that needed to be vacuumed up. And so every day or two, we would vacuum off the screens.
We found housekeeping to be not as difficult as here on Earth. One reason was that we had a planned place for every item.
Personal hygiene-wise, it was necessary for us to perform up there about the same way it is here. We brushed our teeth, we combed our hair, we shaved, we washed. We did have a shower. We found, however, that we could almost keep clean enough by using sponge baths, by washing ourselves off with a wash rag. Although we did use the shower on several occasions, and I think for future space stations, the shower would be a good idea.
We slept in a sleeping bag-like device, which had straps across it, so once you were in the sleeping bag and all snugged up, so to speak, well, you felt very close to what you feel like in bed on Earth.
Okay, we're on dock now. All right, say goodbye for her. She's been a good bird. Roger, sure has. Okay, gas ascension at 1608. Roger, Grim.
I don't think there's any real limit to how long man can stay in space, as long as he never loses sight of the fact that sometime he's going to have to go back to 1G. And if he keeps that in mind and keeps his cardiovascular system and his muscles and his bones toned for that eventuality, then there's no reason to believe that man need worry about how long he spends in space. I don't think there's a limit to that.
All right, welcome back. I hope we all learned something. I don't know what the aim is here. I hope you were entertained. I love watching stuff about Skylab. Skylab is wonderful. There are like a bunch of ways in which it was horribly worse than the International Space Station, but there are also a few ways in which it was way better. Like, as you could probably tell from that clip of the 3 grown men roughhousing in the large central area of Skylab. They had way more space than is available in the ISS. So the ISS is just a bunch of really cramped corridors and nooks and crannies, where Skylab had a massive, very large interior. The other thing is the food. So that the weird part where he's talking about how they all love eating their ice cream and strawberries in space. The fact that they could individually heat all the components of their meal, and the fact that they could heat them at all, is not really something they do on the ISS. I was watching this video of an astronaut who was there a couple of years ago, talking about how, because of the energy costs of doing so, they don't really refrigerate their food because it's all, freeze-dried and room stable, but they also don't really heat it up. And you could just see like a tiny little note of depression creeping into his voice, where he's like, yep, food's never really cold and it's never really hot, wild, the things that they've decided they can and can't go without. Also, fucking the little bit there where they're talking about the vacuum cleaner that they use. There's a weirdly not self-deprecating, I don't know what I'd class it as, but that same astronaut was saying that it's like a famous joke for astronauts that the vacuum cleaner on the ISS is the only thing that doesn't suck, which is a very good joke. But also the implication that the things on the International Space Station are bad is weird. That's like the apex of several different countries' space technology. They're just like, yep, you know what we all think about the ISS? The technology sucks. Very, very strange. Good to see that the Skylab and the ISS have the same size bedroom, though, which is exactly the size and shape of your body, which I'm sure wouldn't drive you completely insane after any prolonged amount of time. So that's most of the clips from the fun golden age of space and adventure that happened ages and ages ago. Our final bit is rounded out largely by hypothetical missions that they wanted to do in the future, some documentary stuff about what they thought other worlds were going to look like, and then one obscenely... So the subject matter in it is not strange. It's talking about how they tried to tie in Skylab into sort of high school education, which was like a reciprocal thing where they would show them stuff from Skylab, but also they got this competition where kids would send science projects up into Skylab, which is really, really cool. But the way the video is presented is just so of the time and so 70s. It's very, very obnoxious and funny. Some great outfits, though. Keep an eye out for the science teacher that you see at the start wearing the most incredible, I think, paisley shirt that you'll ever see. So, yeah, keep an eye out for that. Our next bracket is, well, our final bracket is a half hour long. It's all good stuff. Please enjoy this. I will try and nail the transition this time, but no promises. Let's see.
Generation, someone has said, stands on the shoulders of those who led the generation before. This generation of high school students stands even taller today. In science particularly, the high school students of today tower over those who began their studies in science 25 or 30 years ago.
35 years ago, when I was a student in high school, things were much different than they are today. My high school science laboratory, although it contained many of the basic items of equipment still in use today, was different in that the amount of information available to us was much less than that available to students today. Also, the avenues for the application of newly acquired knowledge were not so obvious. Today, the fundamentals of science are being applied in more and more diversified fields. America's space program, and Skylab in particular, have helped to broaden the vistas of today's science student. The doors of the high school science lab now open into a new and exciting world, even into the new frontier of space.
Skylab's 3 missions opened the walls of man's earthbound laboratories as never before. Skylab not only extended man's vision and his goals into the expanse of space. The Skylab program extended man's ability to work in space for long periods of time and to conduct in space a series of scientific experiments ranging from the nature of the universe to studies of Earth and even down to studies of the structure of a single human cell. Skylab made a unique contribution to science, to man's understanding of himself, his planet Earth, the sun from which the Earth receives its energy, the solar system, and space phenomena. 30 years ago, the results of a major scientific investigation of this kind might have taken decades to filter down into the science curricula of high schools. Today, this happens in a matter of months. For within months of the end of the Skylab program, high school science students throughout America were observing science demonstrations televised from Skylab and designed especially for classroom use.
And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to bounce it with these two long pieces of wire that I have. Okay, let's give it a wrap on both sides.
From a demonstration of a Skylab experiment in fluid mechanics to another Skylab demonstration of an experiment with a gypsy moth in space. Science students in high schools today can watch actual experiments performed in space, presented on their level of understanding in science demonstrations prepared by NASA and circulated to schools. These brief demonstration films cover a variety of subjects in various scientific disciplines. There is an experiment with magnets in zero gravity.
They end up producing a flat spin. And the explanation for that is something that I'm not aware of. And it was a puzzle to me when I first saw it here the other day. And perhaps you can talk that over in your science classes and figure out a good explanation.
Another experiment deals with the behavior of liquid films in space. Astronaut Owen Garriott investigates the behavior of minnows born in the zero gravity of space compared with those born on Earth. Astronaut Alan Bean demonstrates the behavior of darts in a weightless environment. Astronaut Edward Gibson on liquid floating zones. Skylab science demonstrations on other subjects included fluid mechanics, human body momentum, Rochelle's salt growth, and the gyroscope operating in zero gravity.
The spacecraft systems, the Apollo system uses a little gyro like this, a set of them, and it uses these gyros to remember its orientation. What we do is before we spin up the gyro,
Skylab, man in space exploring for high school students today phenomena that cannot be observed on Earth. Skylab is also sure to be noted as the first major scientific undertaking in which experiments designed and supervised by high school student investigators were carried out. For these young scientists, Skylab opened onto space, their classroom walls, erasing the limits with which students so young have always studied until now, accelerating the process of learning at this age.
Hello, I'm Kirk Sherhart from Berkeley, Michigan.
And a man would weigh 500 pounds. In early 1972, mankind launched Pioneer 10, the first mission to the outer planets, the first to venture out beyond the orbit of Mars, out through the Jupiter system, and eventually out of our solar system completely. Share now the odyssey of the Jupiter pioneers. The planets of our solar system come in two varieties. The inner four, including Earth, are heavy, rocky cinders. Where the fifth should be, there's only a band of debris, the asteroid belt. Beyond ride the enormous outer four, the mysterious gas giants. Astronomers have studied them since the time of Galileo. It was he who discovered Jupiter's 4 large moons with his newly perfected telescope. Beautiful ringed Saturn. In 1979, Pioneer 11 will make mankind's first visit to Saturn. if it survives the rigorous journey of 6 years in time, nearly 2 billion miles in distance. Third of the gas giants, Uranus, rotating on its side, it circles the sun like a fallen gyroscope. And finally, Neptune. One of Neptune's moons and one moon belonging to Uranus were discovered by this modern Galileo, the late Dr. Gerard Kuiper of the University of Arizona. It's not easy to break out of the solar system. It requires enough speed to defeat the sun's gravity as well as Earth's gravity. Pioneer streaks away faster than any previous spacecraft, gulping distance at 1,000,000 miles a day, passing the moon in just 11 hours. Still, Jupiter is nearly 2 years away. On the way out past Mars, the experiments are tested and calibrated. Their data add to mankind's understanding of the interplanetary climate of space. The asteroid belt, as some had imagined it. Before Pioneer 10, it was pictured as a region where great boulders grind together, creating a 40,000-mile-per-hour sandstorm. If so, it might have represented a perpetual barrier to outer planet flights. In fact, the pioneers found very little space dust in the asteroid belt. True, there are several thousand asteroids, some as big as Texas, but they should offer no menace to navigation. Pioneer gets its electricity from small onboard atomic heat sources. At 500 million miles, the sun is too weak to power solar cells. The spacecraft spins 5 times a minute for stabilization. On ground command, small thrusters fire to maintain the spin rate and to keep the large dish antenna precisely pointed at the receding Earth. This radio link is a two-way street. A constant stream of information flows back about the health of the Pioneer and its scientific observations. NASA's Deep Space Network tracks the mission. So sensitive are these ears that they will hear Pioneer out to nearly 2 billion miles and lose contact late in 1979. Pioneer is managed and controlled from Ames Research Center located at Mountain View, California, near San Francisco. The Nerve Center is in this building. Pioneer Project Manager Charles F. Hall.
We're in the mission control area for Pioneer 10, and behind us is the mission control room. Now, right now, they're preparing to send quite a few commands up to the spacecraft, merely to change the attitude of one of the instruments, the operating mode, so that we can look on Jupiter. The interesting feature here is that the round-trip light time, the time to get a message from here up to the spacecraft, and then to get a return answer, is 1.5 hours. So our people in there have to be used to this 1.5 hour delay when they start planning the mission.
Commander Arcan. Sure, Captain. We just received the stat clear message. Roger. Arcan Commando, verify command stack loaded. Block message number 9. First command, IP Whiskey 2, time 141032.8. Roger, copy. We're enabling message 10 at this time.
The Pioneers are run by men who send commands from Earth, not by automatic systems on board. This cuts complexity and costs. During encounter, it's busy here. For example, to command just the electronic camera that makes pictures of Jupiter, Pioneer Control transmits some 15,000 commands in just 2 months. In response to these commands, the camera scans Jupiter's turbulent cloud tops as Pioneer spins toward encounter. Because the spacecraft is moving at up to 80,000 miles per hour, and because Jupiter is rotating at 22,000 miles per hour, the scans do not immediately form a pretty picture. They must be decoded and corrected for distortion.
From the earliest history of mankind, there's been a bright red speck of light in the night sky called Mars. For the last few hundred years, we've known that it's a planet, a place more or less like our own, a world in its own right. but a detailed knowledge of what Mars is like had to await the mission of Mariner 9, an unmanned spacecraft which went into orbit around the planet Mars in late 1971 and worked for almost a year.
A geologist looks at a planet to first understand the processes that are going on there, the things that are affecting the development of its surface at the present time. But even more important, we try to look back in the past to place the events that have taken place over a long period of time, to understand what happened early in its development, in the middle part of its development, the things that are happening now, and to predict what might happen in the future.
For a biologist, one of the great scientific opportunities of our time is the search for life on Mars. That question is so important, it will change our whole concept of life. It will change our whole concept of how life originated. The question is not only whether there is life on Mars, but whether that life has a separate origin from our own life, life as we know it.
This is the face of Mars, photographed by earlier mariners. Here, a visitor might think he was on our moon, but this planet, too, was unchanging and dead. But transported to the other face of Mars revealed by Mariner 9, he would see fresh evidence of a living, changing planet. The old craters here have been long since covered by immense flows of lava. Thin white clouds form and drift across the dark blue sky. In the distance, he would see the long, gentle slope of a great volcano. Intense small dust storms scour canyon walls into sharp ribs of ancient rock. Near the poles, he would see a great series of ancient terraces, each layer composed of a mixture of dust and snow deposited by the wind. Each took thousands of years to form. Each is an episode in the history of the planet.
The exciting thing that we discovered, there were many of them, but one very exciting thing that we observed in the middle of the mission was that things were changing before our very eyes on the Martian surface.
The big question for the biologist is, what is life? What do we mean when we say life? We're really only familiar with one form of life, terrestrial life.
Terrestrial life, life on Earth, carries a trademark revealed by biochemical analysis. All living things on Earth are composed of combinations of molecules, some as simple as water, which is fundamental to life as we know it, others of great complexity. One of these combinations, proteins, forms the enzymes that direct the complex chemistry of life. Another, nucleic acids, are genes contained in chromosomes, the basic unit of life. These combinations of molecules distinguish living things from non-living systems. One other element needed to make a living system work is a method of reproduction. DNA is a molecule containing the genetic message, the blueprint for future generations. This genetic code is the same for all living creatures, for all life, which means that there is really only one form of life on Earth.
If there is life on Mars, then there will be a simply fabulous expansion of the perspective of the biologist. Because all the organisms on the Earth, even though they seem to be different, are fundamentally the same. Their chemistry is all identical. And they're just wrapped in different kinds of wrappings. Us bacteria and us people and us plants and us protozoa, we're all the same on the inside. Now the question is, are Martian organisms the same on the inside as us? Is life everywhere, does it have to be the same as us? Or are we just one example of a vast array of possible kinds of biochemistries? Well, there's no way for us ever to answer that question, no way for us to determine the generality of life on Earth, except by looking for life elsewhere. And the nearest candidate planet is surely Mars.
In 1976, 2 Viking spacecraft will place landers on the surface of Mars. One major objective is to search for life in the Martian soil.
But But what kinds of life forms might cope with the special problems of Mars? The Mars atmosphere allows deadly ultraviolet radiation from the sun to penetrate to the surface. Life forms on Mars may have silica shells to protect them against the radiation. We know that Mars is very dry. Life forms on Mars may have developed special ways of preserving their water content, and those forms may not look familiar to us. I can even imagine forms of life having leaf-like structures, oriented by the sunlight, possibly of unusual colors. This is one of the reasons that we want to have color in our cameras. I could imagine a kind of plant. A plant is perhaps how one would identify it, that is indeed an ice eater, with fine root-like structures, searching not for liquid water, but searching the permafrost, reaching down to get at that ice. Another solution to the problem of water might be an organism that eats rock, one that literally picks up the rock, eats the water, and spits out the rock. An imaginative idea, but not wholly ridiculous. We don't know of such creatures on Earth, but it is possible, and people have speculated along those lines.
This special Aeronautics and Space Report brought to you by NASA.
Okay. Ja, Demio, but score, ja, provide you look 3.
If all goes as planned, the next time these men meet and shake hands like this, they'll be 140 miles above the Earth.
How are you, Alexei? What's your
I'm well.
boss?
Glad to see you.
Ah.
How's your family?
Oh.
ASTP, Apollo-Soyuz Test Project. Now in its third year of preparation, all is nearly ready for this first link-up in space with the Soviet Union. Each country will launch and fly its own spacecraft, but share a common docking module that will allow astronauts and cosmonauts to pass to and from each other's spaceship.
I was born in Siberia in 1934, on May 30.
Commander of the Soviet ASTP crew is Alexei Leonov.
A worker, and my mother was a teacher.
Я летал на корабле «Союз-6».
With him, 40-year-old flight engineer Valery Kubasov. Both cosmonauts have made previous space flights for the Soviet Union. The two of them will be piloting the Soyuz spacecraft. Astronaut Donald Deke Slayton, 51, from Sparta, Wisconsin, is one of the 3 American crewmen and will serve as the docking module pilot. Slayton talked about the mission objectives.
The first one is a technical one, and that's to demonstrate a capability to do rescue on an international scale. We haven't had that capability in this country to do it on our own, and of course the Russians haven't either. Over and above that, I think probably one of the biggest benefits, and probably even more so than the first one, is this ability to get together with another country that we haven't been too cooperative with in a lot of areas and do something constructive jointly. And I think this is probably, the benefits of this will be much greater in many other areas than in the space area itself. Just getting technical people together and teaching them how to work together and converse together.
February 1979, Pasadena, California. Lights burn throughout the night in the science offices, control centers, and computer areas of the Jet Propulsion Laboratory. Hundreds of scientists and engineers convene here, drawn worldwide from research centers and universities.
I want to go auto back here, put in 1 FRO, and go all the way through the time period with 1 start. Makes sense.
By the end of the month, photographers, television crews, and other members of the press arrive.
Do you guys have any questions?
They are drawn to the laboratory by 2 Voyager spacecraft, electronic robots sent by NASA to explore the giant planets Jupiter and Saturn.
A little while ago, I heard the remark that images...
Voyager 1's exploration of Jupiter is continued in the summer of 1979 when Voyager 2 approaches Jupiter and its moons. And in 1980 and 1981, each spacecraft explores Saturn and its moons.
It's one of the most fantastic bodies in the solar
Their cameras transmit 60,000 photographs of these strange new worlds. Subtle details not visible in the photographs are computer-enhanced in the laboratory. Scientific data are received from a mix of instruments that probe the planets and the fleet of moons that escort them, sensing magnetic fields and measuring violent spheres of radiation.
Error, 0.75 hertz, BCO.
The teams of scientists meet daily to review this flood of data, to cope with the new and unexpected. And team members report their findings to the waiting reporters and through them to the world.
If this is a shear zone,
The reporter and scientist weld a close relationship in a mutual need to understand and communicate what the Voyagers discover.
rather than tilted the other way.
And the estimate is that the crater is 15 kilometers deep and the central peak is 15 kilometers high.
The Voyager team of engineers and scientists spent 7 years designing and planning for the exploration of Jupiter and Saturn. The spacecraft are endowed with intricate logic systems and, when necessary, can make their own decisions without contact from Earth. They carry instruments for 11 science investigations of the outer planets and their moons. The radio link with Earth is channeled through a large dish-shaped antenna that dominates the spacecraft. 2 television cameras are the eyes of the spacecraft. They can be aimed with great precision. These instruments detect the unseen forces that swirl around these distant worlds. September 18th, 1977. Voyager is 7 million miles from Earth. Its cameras turn back to record the blue Earth and crescent moon together in a haunting photograph of our home in the solar system. 14 months later, Voyager 1's cameras transmit the first photographs of Jupiter. February 5th, 1979. From a distance of more than 17 million miles, Jupiter and 3 of its moons are caught in a single frame. At 12 million miles, Jupiter's clouds of gases and ice particles are seen to swirl and twist in strange new patterns invisible from Earth. From a series of more than 4,000 photographs, a time-lapse movie is made that covers 10 Jovian days. The atmosphere is more complex than had been thought. The trajectories of Voyagers 1 and 2 enable the spacecraft to obtain photographs which provide different aspects of each of the 4 Galilean moons. Europa, the size of our moon, resembles a cracked billiard ball, but the complex markings are curiously flat, like stripes painted on the surface. Its icy crust is thought to float on an ocean melted by interior heat. Io is the most spectacular of the Jovian moons. Its vivid, mottled surface with oddly shaped blotches of color mystify the scientists. Surely the strangest object ever seen in our solar system. Jupiter now joins Saturn and Uranus to become the 3rd planet known to possess a ring system. A second discovery solves the mysteries of Io's bizarre surface. On March 8, 1979, Voyager 1 takes a remarkable photograph of Io. During a routine study of optical navigation, an engineer sees what at first appears to be a crescent cloud. Scientists soon realize that it can only be a volcanic plume erupting from Io, a huge fountain of molten sulfur, gas, and bits of rock surging upward against the moon's weak gravity. A re-examination of Io photographs reveals other active volcanoes, the first seen beyond Earth. 2 days later, engineers find that with care, the platform can again be commanded to move. Despite the fact that Voyager is 1 billion miles from Earth, engineers are able to pinpoint its problem and successfully restore the platform to use. An image reappears on the monitor screen, and the final photographs of Saturn and its rings are sent to Earth.
There's a shadow crossing. Oh, yeah. Ellis has drawn what you should be seeing.
The frame's upside down.
August 1981. Voyager 2 recedes from Saturn on its journey to Uranus and beyond. The recent discovery of 9 rings encircling Uranus and its 5 known moons hold the promise of fresh discoveries. And in 4 more years, Voyager 2 will reach that planet. Three years later, it will reach the 8th planet, Neptune, and its great moon, Triton. Meanwhile, Voyager 1 will continue its flight, searching for the unknown edge of the influence of the sun, where interstellar space begins and our sun is just another star in the sky.
All right. That is us done, folks. I hope you enjoyed that. I particularly enjoyed the little animated illustrations of the possible Mars life forms, the weird, like, Goomba-style moving tree mushroom ice eaters. Delightful. I love the stuff about Voyager. As I was saying in the chat, I think Voyager is maybe one of the nicest single things humanity has ever done, just in terms of the whole project was all about, look at how wonderful humanity is. Look how beautiful we are. What are the chances that we'll find someone else somewhere in the universe that wants to experience that? You look at the photos that they put on the Golden Record, and they are all just like this very misty-eyed view of what the Earth looks like, of humanity as a whole. It is actually insanely lovely. And then we kind of lost the political will for doing stuff like that, and it'll probably never happen again. Cool. I also put a link to one specific image from the Voyager record in the chat because I love it so much, which is meant to be a functional demonstration of how human beings eat, which is someone pouring a jug of water into their mouth from a high angle, someone licking an ice cream, and an extremely disgruntled looking weird middle management type eating a toasted sandwich, I believe. It is sensational. I tried to look for some good documentary stuff about the content that went on there, but couldn't find any. So look for that in your own time. There was some fun controversy around it. I think specifically about the fact that it included nudity, which people didn't like, which is so funny. The idea of just being like, oh no, we mustn't let the aliens see our private parts. That would be undecorous of us. Indecorous? Not sure. Well, anyway, thank you so much for joining me. Netherworld is open. They have a very slightly larger capacity as of today, and you can stand inside a bar. You can order at the bar. Life is absolutely fucking wild. Yeah, go out and enjoy stage 3 restrictions, but do them responsibly. I insist. Don't stand in clumps with strangers. Stay 1.5 meters away from people. Yeah, that's about all I've got to say, I think. So lovely having you as always. We should be doing another of these streams in 2 weeks now that I've found this spot in the basement where the internet works. Very cool. Otherwise, we're still doing our weekly movie nights on Sundays. Just join the Facebook group, 2-Bit Movie Club, and you will see how that works. We've got a Discord. There's some lovely chat in there and some lovely people if you're not already in there. Yeah. Oh, also, Weekend of Darkness at Netherworld's sister venue, older sister venue, the Scratch Bar. That is July 18th on the Saturday. We'll be doing a live stream with some very, very, very silly stuff. It should be good. Go to the Scratch Facebook page. You'll find out all about it there. All right. That's definitely it. See you next time. Be well. Peace.